Good morning, students. In this lecture, we're going to talk about the evolution of cultural policy. And before we move on to a discussion about the evolution of cultural policy, it would be useful to uh, restate the principal function of a cultural policy. Why do we need cultural policy? The principal function of cultural policy is to support certain forms of culture to make it flourish and to make it more accessible to the citizens. This is a point that we have been making again and again. That the principal function of cultural policy, please remember, is to support certain forms of culture to make it flourish and to make it more accessible to the citizens. So why do we need cultural policy? We need cultural policy to support culture, broadly speaking. But in doing this, cultural policy should play a proactive role in shaping the agency of communities and strengthening a sense of solidarity. This is the ultimate and legitimate motive for having a cultural policy. Okay, so let me repeat this point that the uh, one of the major aims of cultural policy is to play a proactive role in shaping the agency of communities and in strengthening a sense of solidarity. And the evolution of cultural policy is an issue that needs to be historicized by making sense of some of the changing meaning of the word culture itself since the 19th century. And the 19th century is obviously very important for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons why it is important is because it threw up new interesting ideas about culture. So generally speaking, during the 19th century, culture was understood as being related to the level of collective development of a community or a group of people. So at this stage, it is common to find culture being equated with art and poetry, for instance, or music of a particular kind. This was mainly due to thinkers such as, the Romantic poets like William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. In any case, as a result of this, art became the most advanced, level of culture. Art reflected the pinnacle of culture. It reflected the best of culture, and it indicated a particular phase of societal evolution. Remember that anthropological understanding of the evolution of society. So culture reflected a particular phase of societal revolution for most people in the 19th century. So only some communities had cultures, others did not. They could only aspire to arrive at a state of culture. It was also believed at this time that not everyone qualifies to be a quote unquote a good or a cultured reader. You find Wordsworth writing about this also. So to be able to appreciate art, one needed training. One needed to be trained in a particular way of looking at things in order to be able to appreciate uh, art, art of the kind that Wordsworth and Coleridge had in mind. So it was not just the producers of culture or the writers uh, who had to be knowledgeable, who had to be refined in terms of culture. It was also expected that readers or the general public too, the masses, they also needed to have acquired a particular kind of sensibility. Thus, at this stage, part of the responsibility of being a good writer meant that one had to educate the masses in a good culture. This too was cultural policy, albeit of a very rudimentary or a very fundamental kind. But you can see the roots, the beginnings of cultural policy here. In trying to in this whole idea of educating the masses in good culture. But apart from this, there were other interesting things happening in the 19th century. The 19th century, of course, is remarkable for its scientific and technological developments. But another important development that took place uh, in the 19th century, and that concerns all of us, uh, I know particularly as students of cultural studies, is the rise of nationalism. Right. The zeal for nationalism meant that very often um, cultural programs had to be had to serve nationalistic goals. The convergence of nationalism and culture, these led to the shaping of homogenized national cultures. This is very important. The convergence of nationalism and culture, it led to the shaping of a homogenized national cultures, which were not always there. In other words, culture was sacrificed at the altar or at the anvil of nationalism. Culture had become secondary in importance to nationalism, and it was made to serve nationalistic goals. Now, today we tend to forget the fact that countries like Germany or countries like Italy or Switzerland, they're not always homogenized nation states like they are today. They were divided into kingdoms, they were divided into small principalities. And these countries were peopled by communities who came from diverse ethnic and cultural backgrounds. And these people who came from these different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, they obviously did not share a sense of common identity. They did not have common ethnic identities or cultural identity. In fact, they even spoke different languages. One example could be the Habsburg Empire that ruled over Austria and Hungary, and which included people who came from many different ethnic groups. So one of the fallout of this nationalism and the nationalist agenda was that culture came to be used as a tool to bring together these communities and inculcate in them a sense of nationhood. So during the 19th century, please remember that nationalism brought about sweeping changes in the world order of Europe. And there was a lot of heterogeneity in Europe, even. That is probably unimaginable today. The culmination of these changes was the emergence of nation states in place of the multinational dynastic empires of Europe. A nation state is one in which the majority of the citizens they come to develop a sense of common identity. This commonness was, I repeat, was not always there. It was forced, it was created. And one of the things that helped in creating this sense of common identity was culture. What helped in the use of culture was also the growth of technology. The availability of printed materials meant wider, it ensured the wider dissemination of nationalistic ideas through novels, travelogues, ethnographies, newspapers, even education. The agenda of building a common national character was not always done overtly or openly. It was sometimes carried out covertly or indirectly through the use of symbols such as national flags and other kinds of symbols like national anthems. Thus, although the people inhabiting a particular territory, they did not actually know each other, they gradually came to share a sense of common identity, thanks to the use of powerfully evocative symbols and also the use of um, single language, the use of maps. Maps serve a very important purpose in encouraging nationalism, in shaping nationalism, and of course other cultural features as well. Thus, in this process, culture came to be organized along official lines. Not everything could count as culture anymore. Okay, there, there were people who were in charge of deciding what could count as culture and what could possibly be left out. And it was thought that it was imperative that people had to be guided towards good culture. Thus, the pressure on the public was twofold. There were two kinds of trajectories here. There are two kinds of things happening at the same time. On the one hand, there was a demand being made by artists, by writers like Wordsworth and Coleridge, who say that there was a need to promote a sense of refinement in culture. And there's another group that sought um, control over culture for nationalistic goals. And the second group was, of course, led by the members of the state bureaucracy or sometimes, directly by the state itself. The necessity to control culture for the purpose of nationalism, it required that culture was organized along official lines. As a result, there were apparatuses and organizations being set up by the states to control the direction of culture, uh, because culture had to be uh, regulated, culture had to be oriented in a particular direction. This, of course, did not mean direct intervention in the performance of artists, or this does not even mean censorship of any kind. But this understanding came to be uh, there amongst the states that culture had to be regulated, and it had to, certain activities were to be given more importance, certain cultural activities were to be given more importance than some other. Thus, there was uh, a nationalization of culture that took place. Just like we talk about the nationalization of banks, there was a nationalization of culture that took place in the 19th century, right? Um, Culture became the one of the most important tools of nationalism. And the state set up institutions and organizations to monitor, regulate, and control cultural activities. And this also, led to the setting up of art institutions, of museums, theaters, and all of that. Meanwhile, the other group was also not sitting idle. The other group too was busy. In the late 19th century, you have thinkers like Matthew Arnold, about whom you are aware, who wrote about the importance of monitoring the development of society as a whole, the development of culture in a society as a whole. This group, whom many have referred to as the culturalists, they begin to argue for the instrumental use of culture for overall social and moral development of a society. In other words, they highlighted the importance of using culture as a tool to promote itself. So, culture had to be used as a tool to promote culture itself. So, that was how, people like Arnold thought about culture. Anyway, come the 20th century, and there was a, particularly since the 50s of the last century, you see a complete change in the ways in which people thought about culture. On a radical change come over one's ways of thinking about culture. And as students of cultural studies would be particularly aware of this, that in the 20th century, thinkers like Matthew Hogarth, Raymond Williams, E.P. Thompson, they, in different ways, they started to criticize the traditional uses of the concept of culture. The whole idea of the clear-cut difference between highbrow and popular culture or lowbrow culture, came to be treated as something that was absurd. That idea had to be given up, it was felt. It is pointed out that goodness or badness of cultural products was a purely relative thing, and it just reflected a way of thinking about culture that was itself very, very limited. When you talk about one culture being good or another culture being bad, it simply meant that you were looking at it from the perspective of your own culture. Now, the intervention of disciplines like cultural studies meant that one had to be aware of the fact that uh, there are different standpoints being offered by different cultures. So there's nothing universal about it, but it's relative. It depends on the position that you have taken. So this understanding has led to a tremendous change in the whole business of cultural policy. And it's very important to keep this in mind. So as the 20th century unfolded, culture became, see, more and more important. And anyway, it was also gaining in importance because it is related to the aspirations and expressions of community identity. Cultural diversity had to be accepted in the 20th century. Identity assertions had become too strong to sideline them anymore. To just tell people that, okay, you can think about your cultures later. We have other agendas to sort out. Let's do that first, and then we'll come back to culture. No, since the second half of the 20th century, it was felt, and the clamor only grew with time, that culture was the most important thing to fight about. So people sought, and in fact, they even fought for recognition of their cultural identity. And to sideline a community's culture came to be seen as, sidelining the community's very existence itself. So recognition, political recognition, social recognition came to be seen uh, through the lens of cultural representation. This was a very important change that took place in the second half of the 20th century. So remember, initially, cultural policy was narrowly confined to a focus on the dissemination of high art alone. This is what people like Matthew Arnold thought. But the approach had to change after the intervention of disciplines like cultural studies. As a result, new issues became important. Say, for instance, recognizing cultural diversity or access to culture of all communities, then multiculturalism, and recognition of local cultural values and ethos instead of universal cultural values and ethos, which were there, but this also came to be seen as equally, if not more important, the local cultural values and ethos. So this is where we're going to stop in this lecture, and the next we will continue our discussion on the evolution of cultural policy. Thank you.